Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Melissa Butkovich-Carraway. Did I get it right?
Yes, you did.
Pronunciation's okay? Good. Phew, phew. So Melissa is in Michigan. She's in Metro Detroit. So that's kind of the outskirts of Detroit. Is that what Metro means? Or yeah,
Yes. Yep, the
yeah,
surrounding cities
the
of
surrounding city. Yeah.
Detroit.
And she works with forever families, and it's the
Yes,
domestic
I'm
adoption you work on.
yes, I'm in domestic adoptions and I also do help in our state ward, so the foster care adoption program as well.
Okay, cool, cool. So, what does thriving mean to you, Melissa?
Yeah, thriving to me means to be the best version of yourself. Not necessarily to be better than others or to be perfect, but to have a healthy level of self-confidence and self-love. I feel I really like the quote that says the best way to make the world a better place is to start with yourself. So making sure that we are working on that self-care and trying to get rid of things that bring down our self-worth.
Yeah,
I feel like thriving doesn't only come from ourselves and our self-worth, but also from our parents and outside influences like other people who are important in our lives, and then from society as a whole.
yeah, yeah. Nice big, nice big scope there. That's great because that gives me lots to explore with you. The one that really jumped out for me was the self love thing. So I don't know if that is a thing. Let's say no. Let me be more professional. Self love itself. So what what does that mean to you? What does self love mean?
I feel like that means feeling that you are worthy of accepting the good things. I feel like those of us who have experienced trauma can sometimes feel that that trauma voice within us that tells us that we are bad and we are unworthy can overpower sometimes. So making sure that we're doing all that we can to not let that voice take over.
Yeah, yeah. The inner voice, the inner critic.
Mhm.
Uh, what else? Yeah, trauma voice.
Yeah, the
Do you
perpetrator.
the perpetrator? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I try and think back what a mentor of mine used to say about this, about the inner voice. He says, "What if the inner voice, the inner critic, became an opinion that we no longer valued?"
Mm, I like that.
Yeah. Um, I think people think we can go to war with the inner critic, can't we?
Definitely. I've heard too, the way you talk to yourself, is that how you would talk to one of your friends or one of your loved ones?
Yeah.
And when you
Yeah.
think about that and all the mean things you can say to yourself, no, I would never say that to someone I love. So why do I have those thoughts and say those to myself?
Yeah. So I guess that begs the question, really, why do we say that stuff to ourselves? Where does it come from?
So I looked into that internal family system approach by Richard Schwartz that you had talked about previously. And I think a lot of it has to come from those different parts that we have. Originally, they are not born bad, all these different separate parts with a capital P that we have, but trauma or attachment injuries may force those parts to become destructive. Those parts might continue to live in survival mode as if the trauma is still happening and interfere with our lives. They can make us feel those feelings that we felt when we were originally traumatized, and we might not even be aware of those
Yeah.
triggers. And in order to survive that trauma, we had to push away those feelings of those parts at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like too, as we had talked about off camera, that adoptees experience those separate parts or those separate selves even earlier than non-adoptees do because of the trauma that they go through right at birth. Being separated from that birth mother with all those familiar smells, familiar sounds, familiar sights, and then they're thrown into an unsure world and not sure if they're able to trust these new caregivers. So that new part of them is just immediately established within themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a question that fascinates me, Melissa, and I don't have an answer for it. I'm not. Sometimes I ask a question and I've got an answer kind of up my own sleeve, and sometimes I don't. This is an occasion when I don't have one up my sleeve. It seemed to me that trauma is largely a felt experience, right? So it's more about our feelings than our thoughts.
Mhm.
And we've been talking about the voice in our head, which is clearly our thoughts. So how do you see the connection between those two, the thoughts and the thoughts and feelings, and trauma being a feeling, whereas the negative voice in our head is our thoughts that we say to ourselves, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it also comes from the fact that trauma isn't what happens to us, it's what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. So the trauma that we experience are those feelings and our nervous system and everything that went on inside of us while things were going on around us or going on to us. It is difficult to separate ourselves from that trauma, but what happened to us is not who you are.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I love metaphors around this, and you know, so when I was adopted back in 1967, people thought that infant, baby adoptees. I was 5 weeks old, right? They think that babies come as blank slates,
Mhm.
right? Um, but they, uh, but they don't. But we don't.
Definitely. And that's a misconception, actually, that a woman named Georgia Tan told adoptive parents when they were starting to adopt in the 1930s, 40s, that these infants are blank slates that they could turn into whatever they wanted them to be. But that's so not true. Adoptees, non-adoptees, we all come with a history of family genealogy, family history, family social history, all of that that makes up who we are. And that doesn't just get erased when we are born or if we are placed into a different family.
Yeah.
It's also with regard to nature versus nurture. Just because you are raised one way doesn't necessarily mean it's going to overfight all those nurture characteristics that you were born with.
Yeah. I've I think about it. What was the lady's name? You said Georgia
Ge-
Tan.
Georgia Tan, yes,
Right.
she
Okay.
had a big influence on adoption in the United States. She ran actually all the 5,000 adoptions that she ran in Tennessee were illegal. Um, and that was because she either didn't follow state policies, uh, her agency was not licensed, so that alone made all of her adoptions illegal. But she also kidnapped children and claimed that their birth parents didn't want them or tricked their birth parents into
Wow.
signing off on them. So she's the one that actually made infant adoption really popular in America. So I guess that's a positive that she did, but her negatives far outweigh any of the positives that
Yeah.
she contributed. She's also the reason why in America, when a child is adopted, a new birth certificate is issued out with the child's new adoptive name and listing the adoptive parents as the birth parents. She did this as also a reason to claim that adoptees are these blank slates that you can recreate into whoever you want them to be. But it was also a tactic to cover up those crimes of kidnapping that she did and to make it harder for birth families to find that child that was adopted.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think about um, that blank slate thing as well. If adoptees are not blank slates, then what's on the slate is therefore trauma, right? It's trauma on the slate. Uh, so that begs the question to me, right? So what's the slate? Do you see what I mean?
I think so. That the slate is like our personality and all those parts that we are just born with.
Yeah. I was thinking. I was thinking. I'm going to look at into the Georgia Town thing because I've not come across that. You were talking earlier on about this IFS approach, and it seems to me so. he talks about Richard Schwartz and the book, ladies and gentlemen, listeners, that is a kind of start a good dive into this for a layperson, is called No Bad Parts, right? So it's about the absence of shame. It's about grace for ourselves. It's about not criticizing our parts. It's about loving ourselves, right? It's about loving ourselves rather than hating our bad parts, right? So
Hmm.
there's no bad parts. Therefore, there's no bad parts to hate or dislike or not be very keen on or whatever it was. So he talks about the trauma being in the parts rather than the uppercase S self. So for me, the blank slate is the same as it's the same thing. It's the same thing as the uppercase S self. It's the part of us beneath our trauma or beneath our psychology.
Yes, I would agree with that, that our slate is that capital S, the capital S in self that Richard Schwartz talks about. It made me think too, I mean, how you said no parts of us are born bad. And it made me think of neglected really young children. If we think of a baby who is cold or hungry and they're crying out for their caregiver and their needs are not being met, eventually they're going to internalize those feelings and wonder, oh, it must be something wrong with me because no one's coming to my care. But we're not born with these feelings of shame and guilt. Rather, it's a learned behavior
Yeah.
and a learned emotion.
So that's the start of the trauma, really.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's the start of the trauma. Apart from the trauma that might be like the generational trauma, you were kind of alluding to that earlier,
Yep.
weren't you? So there may be some in utero trauma, there may
Hmm.
be some generational trauma, there may be this trauma at the relinquishment. So it sounds like trauma is a layer cake, right? Just layering things on it. But the hope here, listeners, is, and the truth is, right, we're not the cake with a cake with a cake holder, with a
Hmm.
cake stand, right? So we're separating out who we are from the trauma that we feel. You talked about internalizing. You talked about internalizing the trauma, Melissa. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that's yeah, I think you've
Yeah.
got a far bigger take on that than I have.
Yeah, I think it comes back to, especially when this trauma happens when we are so young and we don't have the vocabulary to express these feelings that we have. So it gets stored in our internal system and it gets stored in our nervous system and our emotions. And eventually these feelings are going to come out. But if you think about it, when this little baby or a toddler is going through all of these emotions and they have no way to verbalize it, it doesn't mean that it just doesn't go anywhere. It means it gets stored in the body in a different way.
Yeah. So do you see people? Some people talk about processing the emotions. Is
Hmm.
that kind of is that how we is that how you see how we healed? What how do you see that? How do you see the healing given what you've just talked about?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that we have to work through. We have to identify those emotions, we have to acknowledge them, and then we have to work through them, understand that those feelings are valid. And that can be difficult because the adult in us might understand why these things happened. We might understand why they were placed for adoption or why this other trauma happened in our lives. But that child within us still has those feelings and didn't understand. But as an adult, we do have to try to connect with that inner person within
Yeah,
ourselves that was so young that experienced all this and let them know that it's okay. We're going to work through it and how we're going to get to that point of self-love and total connection.
yeah. So are you talking about what? Are you talking about confusion there between the adult self and the inner child? Is that is it what? How would you describe the relationship between those two?
I
part.
think confusion could be a good word for it. Again, just understanding as an adult that maybe you were relinquished because your parent was young or because they had other children or they just weren't in a time in their life to parent or they were single parenting. But again, that child within you didn't understand. All they felt at that time was abandonment or rejection. Um, so trying to connect with that inner person within yourself and understand that what happened wasn't because you were so bad and your mom rejected you or your parent rejected you. It was just what was going on with the adult at that time.
Yeah. So it's a new understanding that changes an old belief.
Yeah. Yes, I would agree. And it doesn't just come from us either. I think our adoptive parents have a lot of work that they can do, and I can dive deep into that if you would like. And then I think society as a whole has lots of misconceptions about adoption and policies that also restrict our adoptees, and all of these do contribute to that ongoing trauma if they're not corrected or
Yeah.
addressed.
Yeah. So um you talked about you talked about self-love, you talked about self-confidence and worthiness, feeling worthy. What we've looked at self-love. How do you see the worthy feeling worthy in the or the self-confidence part of the topics that you suggested at that outset?
Yeah, I think it comes back to just understanding that we are all human. We are all that same self with the capital S to a degree where we all deserve the same value. Every human has value, and understanding that just because you went through something different doesn't mean that you deserve that pain that happened to you. That it's valid that you have those feelings, but you didn't deserve that.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really profound that we didn't deserve it,
Mhm.
that we didn't deserve the feelings.
And it wasn't our
Feeling,
fault.
yeah, yeah. You've reminded me of something that I heard ages ago, which was our feelings aren't our fault.
I like that.
And that's for everybody, right?
Mhm.
We don't have any, we don't have, I don't think, well, I don't know. I don't think we have control over our feelings. We
I
don't
was
have
just having that
dominion.
same thought.
So if we don't have any control over them, if we're not choosing them, then can we beat ourselves up less for feeling less than or for feeling feelings that we don't want to feel?
Mhm. Yeah, it's not going to make us any better of people to have those feelings of guilt or shame or believe that we just deserve
Yeah,
this, but it's hard to control that within us as well.
yeah. A mentor of mine on the West Coast, a guy called Michael Neal, talks about being emotophobic. So, like, we trying to push away bad feelings. You know, people talk about this, don't they? Push away. They're talking about suppressing bad feelings, and yet deserving bad feelings. That's a whole that feels somehow more powerful to me than pushing away. People talk, pushing them away, self-soothing, um, all those things.
Yeah, yeah, going back, that trauma wasn't our fault. So we don't deserve to feel that bad way about ourselves, and it's so much easier said than done.
So if we didn't deserve the trauma, we didn't deserve the feelings that came off the back of that.
I would agree with that, yeah.
This is profound stuff. Um, I remember reading the letter from my birth mum to
Mm.
the social worker that helped me feel her love for me. And uh, kind of blew that belief out of the water that there was something wrong with me or that she didn't love me.
Hmm.
And it was a whole body experience, right? It wasn't just a kind of a thought in my head.
Hmm. And that can be hard too if we are telling our adopted children that their parent placed them for adoption out of love. That can be really a confusing message to a child too. Like, oh, well, my adoptive parents love me so much. Are they going to leave me one day too?
Yeah, yeah. So, what if you a couple 5 minutes or so you talked about the kind of the adoptive parents insights for adoptive parents that you've had a look at. So, do you want to share some of those?
Yeah, I have a lot of advice for our adoptive parents, and I know it's going to sound overwhelming. So, adoptive parents, pick and choose what you feel like you need to work on or what you think would help your adoptee thrive the most. For starters, I think as adoptive parents, before they even adopt, they need to heal from their own trauma. They need to understand why they are looking into adoption. If it had feelings and struggles to do with infertility, then they need to make sure that they have come to terms with not having biological children before they adopt, because an adopted child is not a replacement to a biological one. And if adoptive parents don't work through those feelings, then an adoptive child might end up feeling like they are held to standards of an unborn biological child. So, making sure that those adoptive parents work through those feelings and that they are ready to adopt, I
Yeah,
think is the first one before
yeah,
they even have a child placed in their home.
yeah. Do you clearly that's going to get in the way of the family thriving?
Hmm.
Um, what what other barriers do you see to adoptive families thriving?
Well, I'm not sure if all of our adoptive families are completely informed on adoption trauma and the primal wound, and statistics that come with adoptees, that they are 4 times as likely to attempt suicide, that there's higher levels of substance abuse. So the adoption workers should be talking about this with the prospective adoptive parents, but adoptive parents also need to be doing their own research.
Yeah,
They should also be looking at the behaviors that their child is having and trying to understand if those are normal attachment behaviors or if it's something to be concerned about.
yeah,
Like if, like for instance, if a teenager is just wanting privacy or they're experimenting with self-identity, those aren't anything to be concerned about.
yeah,
But if our toddlers and our older school age kids are just completely unable to regulate their emotions, maybe it is time to seek that professional help because there
yeah.
might be an attachment disorder.
Do you get many parents coming to you and your colleagues, Melissa, on this stuff?
Not, no, I feel like it's something that I introduce to them, and sometimes they're not aware of it. I know I was not aware of it until I really got into this field because it's not something that society
No.
talks about. In society's mind, adoption is this positive fairy tale happy ending, and that's not the case. Adoption is not a destination, it is a journey, and there's always loss involved with it. The child has lost their chance to grow up with their biological parents, sometimes within their biological family. And if it's a transracial or international adoption, they've also lost that chance to grow up in their own culture or in their own country with their own language. So, as adoptive parents, too, they need to acknowledge the loss that their child has endured.
Yeah. So do you think then that kind of we're not doing enough pre-adoption training as a
I don't think there's ever too much pre-adoption training.
yeah, yeah. Good point. Good point. Because is there a mandated minimum in Michigan? Because I think it changes, doesn't it, from
For
state to state?
Yeah, in Michigan, for families adopting from the Michigan foster care system, they do have to go through a training. I believe it's 24 or 32 hours long,
Right.
and it covers family relationships, trauma-informed parenting, child development, attachment and relationships. It covers many,
Yeah.
many
Thank you.
different topics. And then personally, at our agency at Forever Families, we do put our adoptive families through a 6-hour training. And within that, it covers communication. It also covers legal and
Right.
recruitment. But in the communication part, we do talk
Yeah.
about trauma and being trauma
Yeah.
informed.
Yeah. And so do many parents, adopted parents, come to you with come to your colleagues with challenges after the event, or is it are they taking them elsewhere or trying to figure it out on their own? What's the usual kind of vibe around that?
So after the adoption is finalized, we do have support groups for our adoptive families where we all get together in the community with the adopted children just to build everybody's network of having other adoptive
Okay.
families. But with regard to issues, unless it's really brought up at those post-adoption meetups or the family is reaching out to us, we
Yeah.
don't really overstep our boundaries
No,
to
no,
see
of
that.
course.
But at finalization, we do recommend support groups that they can join. We give them those post-adoption resources that the state of Michigan offers for our families. So they are able to reach out to them. They all
Yeah.
also have built that community of other adoptive families pre-finalization and post-finalization so that hopefully they can go to their peers as well with the issues that they are dealing with,
Yeah.
and maybe that other family will have some advice for
Yeah.
them.
So other people have told me that there can be a reticence, can be reticence of it's I think it's a human thing, not an adopted parent thing, but there can be a reticence. There can be people can be slow to seek outside support because they think that they know their child best, or they think that they think that they should be able to handle this stuff themselves. What do you say on to what do you say to that? Is that something that you've come across, or
I would say to that to not be afraid to seek out help, that if you are experiencing any challenges, it's most likely guaranteed that there's another family that has gone through the same challenge as you, or that they will know somebody who is able to help you with that situation you are in. So nobody knows everything. Nobody is a perfect parent, even if you've raised 10 kids. Nobody always knows what they're doing 100% of the time.
yeah,
So don't be afraid to seek out help and ask questions.
yeah, yeah? Because I see that getting in the way of thriving,
Hmm.
the kind of pride. Um, and I'm thinking back to something. I'm thinking back to a friend of mine who used to kind of laugh at me for having a business coach. Uh, and and that turned out to be kind of funny, really, because he went bust twice.
Hmm.
I, oops. Um, it's pride, and I mean, I'm talking about a quite a proud guy or arrogant chap. I haven't come across anything approaching that in the adoption space. So perhaps I shouldn't have brought it up anyway. Um,
It's okay.
what 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 else do you see in terms of what else do you see in terms of barriers and how we overcome barriers so that our adoptive families thrive?
Yeah, I think also educating them on the importance of birth-family relations when it is safe to do so, keeping that line of communication open for the child, because research has shown that open adoptions are the best for the adopted child so that they can know their biological roots, they can know who their biological families are, and it just gives the most peace of mind to that adopted person. Um, so I think as adoptive parents, they should be open to having that line of communication with the biological family as long as it's safe to do so. Also, not talking poorly about the child's birth family, even if it is how you really feel, the child might start to internalize those feelings and feel that there's something wrong with them when it's circumstances that are completely out of their control. And
Yeah,
then if you are matched with a birth mom while she is still pregnant, providing that emotional support to her before birth and after relinquishment, if that's applicable
yeah,
to your adoption
yeah,
scenario.
yeah. One of the things that's really struck me, Melissa, having met you a couple of times now, is how much you kind of pour into how much of your energy and time you pour into studying and learning. I'm and I think that's fantastic. I take my hat off to you on that.
Thank you.
What else helps? Well, what else? Or you talked about being the best version of ourselves. I'm just wondering if we could change tack slightly and
Mhm.
look at, talk about you and what helps, you know. So maybe first off, how do you see the relationship between learning and being the best version of Melissa that you can be?
That's a good question. I don't think that anyone should ever stop learning. I feel like even though I have been in this field for 5 years, there is still so much left to learn. I can never learn enough. Even learning more about individual people's experiences. And just in my free time, I do read a lot of books about adoption. I listen to podcasts like Thriving Adoptees in my free time.
Thanks for the
And
plug. They're already
of
listening.
course,
Yeah.
it's just something that I've always been really interested in ever since I was in about high school. When in America we have MTV and the
Yeah.
show 16 and Pregnant, and Teen Mom came out when I was in high school, and there were some teenagers on there that placed their children for adoption. So that really started getting me thinking about unplanned pregnancies and adoption. So it's just always been something I've have felt really passionate about.
Yeah.
Um, so I just, yeah, going back to the learning, I feel like I just can never learn enough.
Yeah.
There's always different topics. Right now I'm reading a book about safe surrenders. The next book I'm going to read is about embryo adoptions. So there's just so many different types of
Yeah.
adoption and topics within the adoption world that I feel like I could just never know
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
all. There's always room to grow.
So yeah, fantastic. What are the most kind of surprising things that you've been learning over the last 6 months or so? What is it that kind of you think, oh, I didn't see it like that? What were the kind of light bulb moments for you?
I'm not sure within the last 6 months, but since being in this field, I always had the misconception that a child adopted from birth had no trauma. And I think that's something that society as a whole thinks too. Oh, I want to adopt a baby because they have no trauma. And as we talked about earlier, there's that generational trauma and utero trauma and that primal wound separation. Once I read Nancy Verrier's book of the primal wound, my mind just exploded. I was like, how could I have not thought that separation from birth parents at birth, how could I have been so ignorant as to think that there's no trauma with that? So I think that was the biggest light bulb moment. And that was a few years ago at this
Yeah,
point. Um, and within the last 6 months, I've really gotten to work more with domestic families, whereas before the majority of my experience is in foster care adoptions. So seeing the birth mom going through her experience of relinquishment and making that decision for herself. It's been interesting to actually see it in person, the decision process that they have to go through and those tough feelings of relinquishment.
yeah, yeah. Other than learning, which clearly is a passion of yours, what helps you become that best version of yourself?
I think also unplugging when I need to. So after a long day of work, coming home and not thinking about work, trying to ignore it on the weekends, unless I do get a call on my cell phone or a really important email, that self-care in social work is very important so that you can always come back as the most refreshed version of yourself. I think secondary trauma is also very real in the social work world, especially when you're working with foster care adoption cases and these children are being available for adoption due to parental rights being terminated due to abuse or neglect. So, reading about some of those histories of why the children came into care and why they are available for adoption can be really
Yeah,
hard. So, I think sometimes in the social work world, we have to laugh about some bad things because otherwise it'll just break us down.
yeah,
So, making sure that we are recognizing that secondary trauma that we are going through as social workers, leaning on our coworkers when we are feeling overwhelmed and we need that extra support and then taking that time to just unplug and
yeah,
recharge ourselves.
yeah. Have you come across Bessel van der Kolk in your research?
I
In your
have
read?
not.
No,
What is
okay.
that? Or who is that?
So he's a trauma guru guy. So he's a bit like Richard Schwartz in that
Okay.
respect. But it's so his his book is bestseller. It's sold like 5 million copies of it, only in the last 10 years. So 10, 11 years maybe. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. So a lot of
Oh,
yeah,
yes, it's
you've
on my
heard.
reading list.
Okay, it's on your list, yeah. Um, he's like a veteran a veteran of trauma work, right? Not a, I don't know whether he's a veteran, military veteran or not, but he's a veteran trauma guy. So he's in his 70s or his 80s, and he and despite that, right? You've talked about secondary trauma. Um, he's only just seen his.
Mm,
So, like that was a real, I ask you that question about what's surprised you the most recently. That's what surprised me the most recently. That somebody who is steeped in trauma research and a trauma researcher, somebody that's pushing the boundaries, understanding um, this trauma that's internalized within in our bodies, is was unaware of his own uh,
mhm.
secondary trauma. That leads me to a question: is like because the Primal Wound came out in 1993, I think it was published. I don't know when it really.
It
I
was,
didn't know whether it was an instant hit straight off the bat or if it
mhm.
was a long burn or whatever it was. But Nancy Berry was the lady that became um, was the first person to kind of make us aware of this trauma stuff.
She was really ahead of her time.
She was ahead of her time. And I'm wondering to what extent social workers are aware of secondary trauma. Is it kind of aware? Is it widely understood? Given that this Bessel van der Kolk guy didn't see his until he started doing some ayahuasca and uh, therapy with that.
Yeah, I can only speak to the trainings that I've been through, and I've only ever done social work in the state of Michigan. But the state of Michigan, and at least the private agencies that I've worked at, I feel like do a very good job of um, making sure our workers get self-care. We
Yeah,
have had yoga on our lunch hour before. We have like little pizza parties and stuff every once in a while. So I think our work, especially where I'm at now at Forever Families, does recognize that our workers need to
yeah,
take those moments for self-care and, like I said, unplug a little bit. And I do recall in the state of Michigan training for foster care adoptions that they do touch on secondary trauma. And at the private
brilliant.
agencies I worked at, they do recognize self-care. Our agency
Yeah,
is definitely understanding if you need to take time off. We do not get scolded for taking time off and using our paid time off. That's something that they understand that we need so that, again, we can come back to be that most refreshed
yeah,
and recharged version of ourselves.
yeah. That's good to know. It's just the old timers that may be missing it. Maybe it's a generational thing, right?
And it could
Um,
be, it might definitely be something that was not addressed previously. But as I've started working in the social work field in about 2016, I think
yeah,
it's definitely something that is being
it's
addressed more
it's been
often.
there. Yeah, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. Um, So you did a whole load of preparation for today. Is there anything that I've not asked you about that you'd like to share?
Um, I definitely do have lots of notes. I came prepared.
Yeah.
And I know I keep putting it back on the adoptive parents, so I'll do larger right now, and I'll talk
Okay.
about society as a whole.
Yeah.
We had talked earlier about how society as a whole does tend to see adoption as this positive thing, or it's just an opposite to an option for abortion. And usually that trauma is ignored that adoptees go through. I did hear a really good comparison once that was if we think about a baby who just got adopted into a closed adoption and then a baby who lost their mother in childbirth, society tends to only grieve for the child who lost their mother in childbirth and not the one who lost their mother in a closed adoption. And
Yeah.
I do understand death is permanent, whereas adoption has the chance for reunification. But in that moment, both of those babies are having those exact same feelings of loss and rejection and abandonment and what's going on around me. Everything is so new. Can I trust these new caregivers? But as a society, we tend to only feel
Yeah.
bad for the one baby.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a stark reminder, really, I
Hmm.
guess. Um, and one of the things, building off the back of what you said, Melissa, is that a lot of the anger that people people may see online from adult adoptees, this misunderstanding and diminishment of the trauma,
Hmm.
that's that's a core part of a core driver of uh, their anger, right? Uh, and so at first, I think there's there's an anger towards the parents. So if the parents, and this is also kind of generational time based, right? So the older 1993 was the time that Primal Wound came out, right? So I think it's I think it's really unfair of us as adoptees to blame, to criticize parents who raised us in the 60s, 70s, 80s, early 90s, right? To criticize them about trauma knowledge when trauma knowledge wasn't around, right? Adoption trauma knowledge wasn't around, right? So I say this I sum this up if I can think of the word. I sum this up hopefully a little bit more succinctly than that. It it's wrong. It's not fair to criticize, to judge 20th century parenting knowledge with 21st century trauma knowledge. It's just not
Hmm.
fair to do that. So, so what's happened? So if a parent has raised a child thinking that that child is a blank slate and has no trauma, and the child is fully aware of that trauma, right? There's a mismatch there, and that leads to a lot of challenges within the adoptive family. So then that can, if we kind of scope that out to the societal challenge, right? The mismatch is even bigger, right? So it's not only did my parents minimize my trauma, society's minimizing my trauma.
Hmm.
So the anger kind of snowballs, and that's the reason for that's the reason I think, or a big part of the reason that adoptees sometimes um, say what they say, because it's this first parental and then societal negation of their trauma.
Yeah, I would agree. And I liked your point of not comparing adoptive parents to what they used to be to what they are today, because we have so much more research and information of how adoption affects a person than they ever had. Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, workers told adoptive parents to not tell their child that they were adopted, that they didn't need to know that information, that if you just love them enough, it will be good enough. And there were in America, there was like a match science that happened in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, where workers and researchers felt that if they could just find the right temperament and the right looks physically, and they could just match them perfectly with their adoptive family, then they could just ease in there as though it was their biological family, and gave adoptive families the misconception that the child would have no trauma, there'd be no issues from the adoption. Even therapists overlooked it and didn't feel that adoption was something that needed to be talked about in therapy. So it is pretty amazing how far we have come as a
Yeah,
society,
yeah.
but there's still a lot
There's
more that
always here
needs
to
to be
go.
done.
Yeah, far to go.
Yeah. I think part two, society needs to realize how hard searching and reunification can be. I think some people have the misconception of, well, if the adopted person had a really good childhood, why do they need to search for their birth relatives? But if we think about it with non-adopted people also do ancestry DNA and are interested in their family history. So it's not just something that someone who didn't grow up around that would be
Yeah,
curious about. And it's a total natural curiosity too. It doesn't mean that the adoptive parents did anything wrong. And I think there's a misconception that once a adopted person meets their birth parent, that's all good and reunification is done and that's the happy ending, when it's not. Reunification, the initial meeting is just the very beginning, and there can be a lot of different feelings that come with that, with regression or a secondary rejection. So it's not all just
yeah,
sunshine and butterflies, again, that I think the large scale of society tends to think about adoption.
yeah. Good points. Good points. So thank you so much, Melissa. It's been a great conversation, and nobody has ever prepared as well as you for one of the conversations. So hats off to that.
Oh,
It was
thank
great.
you.
It was great. Um, Anything else you want to add, or are we about we can wrap it up?
I think we can wrap it up. I would just reiterate the point again that I think to make our adoptees thrive, it will come from internally, making sure that we are processing all the emotions and trauma that we've went through. But on a bigger scale, it's making sure our adoptive parents are well educated and trauma informed and doing everything they can to boost their child's self-esteem and helping them search and helping them know their birth parents' information. And then on an even larger scale, it's society needs to make some changes, policies need to make changes. So there's a lot of different moving parts that go
Yeah,
into making an adoptee thrive.
yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, listeners. We'll speak to you again very soon. Take care.